He thought the badge on his chest gave him the right to play God. He thought the terrified 17-year-old boy in the orange jumpsuit was just another statistic, another nobody he could break without consequence. In a packed courtroom, Officer Derek Vance made the biggest mistake of his life. He raised his hand and slapped the defendant across the face. Silence fell over the room. But that silence was about to be shattered, because the man walking through the back doors wasn't just a concerned parent. He was the one man the entire police department feared, and he was about to teach Officer Vance a lesson in pain, power, and absolute karma. Before we dive into this satisfying takedown, I have a question for you. Have you ever witnessed someone abusing their power only to regret it later? Or what would you do if someone laid a hand on your child? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you believe that justice should be blind, regardless of the uniform, hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story where the bad guys finally get what they deserve. Now let's watch Officer Vance's world fall apart. The air conditioning in the fictional Oak Creek County courthouse had been broken for 3 days, but that wasn't the reason Julian Banks was sweating. The 17-year-old sat at the defense table, his hands clasping and unclasping in his lap, trying to stop the tremors. He was wearing a borrowed suit that was a size too big, the sleeves slipping down over his knuckles, making him look even younger than he was. To his left sat his public defender, a tired man named Mr. Henderson, who smelled of stale coffee and resignation. To his right, across the aisle, sat the man who had ruined Julian's life, Officer Derek Vance. Vance was leaning back in his chair, chewing on a toothpick, looking utterly bored. He was a large man, thick-necked with a buzz cut and eyes that looked like cold, hard pebbles. In Oak Creek, Officer Vance was known as the enforcer. He didn't write tickets. He made examples. "All rise," the bailiff droned. Judge Martha Reynolds swept in, her robes billowing. She looked irritated, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead as she took her seat. She glanced at the docket, then down at Julian. "Case number 4908, she announced, her voice echoing in the stifling room. "The State versus Julian Banks. Charges: resisting arrest, assault on a police officer, and disorderly conduct." Julian flinched at the word assault. He hadn't touched anyone. He had been driving home from basketball practice when Vance pulled him over for a broken taillight. A taillight, Julian knew, was working perfectly. Within 3 minutes, Julian had been on the pavement, Vance's knee in his back, gasping for air while Vance screamed that he was reaching for a weapon. The weapon was his cell phone. "Prosecution, you may proceed," Judge Reynolds said, fanning herself with a file folder. Assistant District Attorney Simon Clark stood up. He was young, ambitious, and clearly terrified of crossing the police union. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. On the night of July 4th, Officer Vance conducted a routine traffic stop. The defendant, Mr. Banks, became belligerent. When Officer Vance attempted to detain him for safety, Mr. Banks swung at the officer. Officer Vance used necessary force to subdue the suspect." Julian shook his head violently. "I didn't," he whispered. "Quiet, Julian," Mr. Henderson hissed, not looking up from his notes. "Officer Vance," the ADA called. "Please take the stand." Vance walked to the witness stand with a swagger that made Julian's stomach turn. He swore in, his eyes locking onto Julian's with a smirk that promised nothing but malice. "Officer," A.D. Clark asked, "did you feel your life was in danger?" "Absolutely," Vance lied smoothly, his voice deep and gravelly. "The kid? Excuse me, the defendant. He was aggressive, erratic. I saw him reach for his waistband. In my line of work, you don't wait to find out if it's a gun or a hairbrush."
"I acted to protect the community."
"And the injuries on the defendant's face?" Clark asked, gesturing to the fading bruise on Julian's cheekbone. "He struggled," Vance shrugged. "He hit his face on the pavement when I took him down. Unfortunate, but if he'd just complied, we wouldn't be here." It was a script, a rehearsed perfect script that Julian had no way to fight. Who would the judge believe? An honors student with a scholarship to a prep school, or a decorated veteran of the force with 15 years on the job? Mr. Henderson stood up for the cross-examination. He was weak. He asked a few questions about the lighting, about the body cam footage, which conveniently had malfunctioned during the arrest. Officer Vance, Henderson said, adjusting his glasses, my client is an honor roll student. He has never been in trouble. Why would he suddenly attack an armed officer? Vance leaned forward into the microphone. The courtroom was dead silent. Kids these days, Vance said, his tone dripping with condescension. They don't have respect. They think the rules don't apply to them. They think because they play sports or get good grades, they can talk back to the law. I taught him a lesson in respect. Objection, Henderson said weakly. Relevance? Overruled. Judge Reynolds sighed. Officer Vance, stick to the facts. The fact is, Vance continued, ignoring the judge, looking directly at Julian. He's a thug, just like the rest of them. He needed to be put in his place. Something inside Julian snapped. The fear was suddenly replaced by a hot, blinding flash of indignation. He stood up. I asked you why you were hurting me. Julian's voice cracked, loud and desperate in the quiet room. I asked you to stop because I couldn't breathe. I never touched you. Sit down, Mr. Banks, Judge Reynolds barked. But Vance didn't look at the judge. He looked at the boy. The arrogance on the officer's face curdled into rage. He wasn't used to being challenged. Not by suspects, and certainly not in his courtroom. You calling me a liar, boy? Vance growled, forgetting the microphone, forgetting where he was. I'm calling you a criminal, Julian shouted, tears stinging his eyes. You turned off your camera because you knew you were wrong. It happened in a blur. Officer Vance stood up from the witness stand. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He just reacted with the brute impulse that had guided his career for a decade. He took 2 long strides toward the defense table. The bailiff shouted, "Hey!" But he was too slow. Vance loomed over the table. Julian flinched, raising his hands, but Vance's open palm came down with the force of a gunshot. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud. It echoed off the high wooden ceiling. Julian's head snapped to the side, and he crumpled into his chair, shocking the entire room into paralysis. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The judge's mouth was open. The ADA dropped his pen. The court reporter stopped typing. Vance stood there, chest heaving, his hands still raised, realizing too late what he had just done. He had physically assaulted a minor defendant, in the middle of a session, in front of a judge, and on the court record. He lunged at me, Vance stammered, trying to reclaim the narrative, but his voice lacked its usual power. You saw it. He was threatening me. Julian held his cheek, blood trickling from his lip. He didn't speak. He just looked at the floor, the humiliation burning hotter than the pain. Officer Vance! Judge Reynolds screamed, finding her voice.
Step back!
Bailiff, restrain him. I'm fine. Vance said, waving the bailiff off, adjusting his belt. Just maintaining order, Your Honor. You just struck a child in my courtroom. Reynolds was shaking with fury. I am holding you in contempt. I want— Boom! The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were thrown wide with such force that they banged against the back walls. Every head in the room swiveled around. Standing in the doorway was a man. He was tall, wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than Officer Vance made in 3 months. He wore dark sunglasses, which he slowly removed, revealing eyes that burned with a terrifying, icy calm. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were 2 other men in suits holding briefcases, looking like executioners in corporate attire. The man in the center stepped into the aisle. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked solely at Officer Derek Vance. Who are you? Judge Reynolds demanded, banging her gavel. This is a closed session. Get out. The man ignored her. He walked down the center aisle, his dress shoes clicking rhythmically on the linoleum floor. The sound was like a clock ticking down. He stopped at the railing, just 10 feet from where Vance stood. The stranger looked at Julian, seeing the blood on the boy's lip and the red handprint blooming on his cheek. The man's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He turned to Vance. "You have 5 seconds," the man said. His voice was low, smooth, and carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavy. 5 seconds to step away from my son," Vance scoffed, though he took a subconscious step back. "Your son? Who do you think you are, pal? I'm a police officer. You disrupt this court and you'll be in a cell next to him." The stranger reached into his jacket pocket. The bailiff's hand went to his gun. "Sir, hands where I can see them." The man didn't flinch. He slowly withdrew a leather wallet. He flipped it open. A gold badge caught the courtroom lights. It wasn't a local police badge. It wasn't a state trooper badge. "Special Agent Blaise Banks," the man announced, his voice slicing through the tension. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Assistant Director of the Public Corruption and Civil Rights Division." The color drained from Officer Vance's face so fast it looked like he was fainting. Blaise Banks didn't put the badge away. He held it up, turning slowly to face the judge.
"Your Honor," Blaise said, "I apologize for the interruption."
"But I believe I just witnessed a federal civil rights violation committed by a public servant in your presence. And unless I am mistaken," Blaise looked back at Vance, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I believe this officer just assaulted a federal defendant, and that, Officer Vance, puts you in my jurisdiction." The silence that followed Blaise Banks' declaration was heavier than the humid air in the courtroom. It was the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. Officer Derek Vance looked at the gold badge, then up at Blaise's face, then back at the badge. His brain, usually quick to categorize people into threats or victims, was misfiring. Federal Agent, Assistant Director, Civil Rights Division. It was the holy trinity of a dirty cop's nightmares. I didn't know," Vance stammered, his gravelly voice reduced to a dry rasp. The boy didn't say." "The boy," Blaise said, putting his badge away but keeping his eyes locked on Vance, "has a name. It is Julian, and he didn't say anything because he knows that in a town like this, invoking my name usually just makes things worse for him. He wanted to handle this on his own merits." Blaise turned his head slightly to his left, addressing the 2 suited men behind him. "Agents Miller and Kovich, secure the scene. Nobody leaves this courtroom. Not the bailiff, not the stenographer, and certainly not the defendant or the witness." "Now wait a minute." Judge Reynolds stood up, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. "Agent Banks, you have no authority to commandeer my courtroom. This is a state proceeding." Blaise walked to the swinging gate of the gallery. He didn't open it. He simply stepped over it with an athletic grace that belied his suit. He walked straight to the defense table, ignoring the judge completely. He stopped in front of Julian. The boy was trembling, holding a tissue to his bleeding lip. "Dad," Julian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought you were in D.C.? "I was," Blaise said softly, his demeanor shifting instantly from terrifying enforcer to gentle father. He reached out, his thumb lightly grazing the swelling bruise on Julian's cheek. The tenderness in the gesture made the violence Vance had inflicted moments ago seem even more grotesque. "I caught the first flight back when I saw the arrest report come across the wire." "I'm sorry I'm late, son." Blaise turned back to the room. The tenderness evaporated. The ice returned. "Judge Reynolds," Blaise said, his voice projecting clearly. "Under Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, it is a federal crime for a person acting under color of law to willfully deprive a person of a right or privilege protected by the Constitution. I just watched a uniformed officer strike a restrained minor in the middle of a judicial proceeding. This is no longer a traffic case. This is a federal crime scene." He pointed a finger at the bailiff. a heavy-set man who looked ready to bolt for the door. "You, put Officer Vance in cuffs." The bailiff froze. "Sir, you heard me," Blaise barked. "Unless you want to be charged as an accessory after the fact for aiding a suspect in a felony assault, you will place Officer Vance in handcuffs. Right now." Vance took a step back, his hand instinctively dropping to his utility belt. "Don't even think about it," Agent Miller said from the back of the room. He had already drawn his sidearm, not pointing it, but holding it at the low ready. The sheer escalation of seeing a federal weapon drawn in a traffic court made Ada Simon Clark slide under his desk. Vance looked around. He looked at the judge, pleading with his eyes for help. But Judge Reynolds, realizing her career was dangling by a thread, looked away, suddenly very interested in her paperwork. "Derek," the bailiff said apologetically, pulling his cuffs out. "Don't make this harder, man." "This is insanity," Vance shouted, his face purple. "You can't arrest me. I am the law in this town. Chief Higgins will hear about this." "I'm counting on it," Blaise said calmly. The metallic click-click of the handcuffs securing Vance's wrists behind his back was the loudest sound in the room. The enforcer, the man who had terrorized the west side of Oak Creek for a decade, was now slumped forward, restrained by his own colleague. Blaise turned to his son. "Mr. Henderson," he said to the public defender, who was staring with his mouth agape. "Yes?" "Motion to dismiss all charges against my client with prejudice, citing prosecutorial misconduct and egregious police brutality," Blaise suggested helpfully.
Right, yes.
Henderson scrambled to his feet. "Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss." Judge Reynolds slammed her gavel down so hard the handle cracked. "Dismissed." "Case dismissed. Mr. Banks is free to go." "He's not going anywhere just yet," Blaise said, helping Julian stand up. "He's a material witness, and we have a lot of work to do." Blaise guided Julian toward the exit, passing within inches of the handcuffed Vance. Vance glared at them, his fear momentarily replaced by a toxic, hateful pride. "You think this is over, Fed?" Vance spat. "You come into my town, humiliate me? You have no idea how deep the roots go here. You just started a war." Blaise stopped. He leaned in close to Vance's ear. "Derek," Blaise whispered, "I didn't come here to start a war. I came to end one, and as for your roots, I brought a shovel." The hallway outside Courtroom 4B was chaos. News of the incident had traveled through the courthouse grapevine at the speed of light. Deputies were scrambling. Lawyers were whispering in huddles, and a local news crew that had been there for a different trial was frantically setting up their cameras near the exit. Blaise Banks ignored them all. He marched Julian into a vacant conference room adjacent to the clerk's office. Agent Kovich stood guard outside the door, crossing his arms and effectively becoming a human wall against the swarm of local deputies trying to get in. Inside, Blaise sat Julian down and handed him a bottle of water from his briefcase. "Let me see the lip," Blaise said. He inspected the cut. "You'll need a stitch or two, but you're okay." "I didn't hit him, Dad," Julian said, his hands still shaking. "I swear." "The dash cam. He said it was broken." "I know you didn't hit him," Blaise said. He pulled a chair over and sat knee to knee with his son. "And nothing is ever truly broken, Julian. Not when the FBI Tech Analysis Unit gets involved." The door opened. Agent Miller walked in holding a plastic evidence bag containing an iPhone and a body camera unit. "Got them off Vance before they booked him into the county holding," Miller said. He tried to pass the phone to the bailiff, but I intercepted. "Good," Blaise said. "Get the logs. I want to know who he texted immediately after the arrest on July 4th. And get that body cam too. The mobile unit in the van. I want to know if it really malfunctioned or if he just held the power button down." "On it," Miller said, turning to leave. But as Miller opened the door, A wall of uniforms blocked his path. Standing there was Captain Greg Higgins. He was a short, barrel-chested man with a mustache that looked like a bristle brush. He was the police chief of Oak Creek, and he looked ready to kill. Behind him were 4 uniformed officers, hands resting on their belts. "Step aside," Higgins barked at Agent Miller. He pushed into the room, his eyes locking on Blaise. "Banks," Higgins growled. "I should have known. I heard a Fed caused a scene, but I didn't think you'd be stupid enough to come back to your hometown and arrest one of my men." "Captain Higgins," Blaise said, standing up. He didn't look intimidated. He looked bored. "It's been a while. You've put on weight." "Cut the crap, Blaise! Release Officer Vance immediately. You have no jurisdiction to arrest a local officer for a courtroom outburst. That's a contempt charge." A slap on the wrist. "You're overreaching." "It wasn't an outburst," Blaise corrected him. "It was the culmination of a pattern of behavior. Assault under color of law. And since you're here, Captain, I have some questions for you." "I'm asking the questions," Higgins shouted. "You can't just walk in here." "And I can," Blaise interrupted, his voice hardening. "I just did, and here is what is going to happen next. You are going to suspend Derek Vance without pay pending a federal inquiry. You are going to turn over all arrest records involving Officer Vance for the last 5 years, and you are going to give me the server keys to your dash cam storage facility." Higgins laughed. It was a cold, nervous sound. "You're fishing. You got mad because your kid got roughed up. It happens. The kid has a mouth on him. Vance is a good cop. He gets results. You think you can take him down? You'll be fighting the whole department. The union won't stand for this. The mayor won't stand for this." "The blue wall," Blaise noted dryly. "I was wondering how long it would take you to build it." Blaise walked over to the window, looking out at the parking lot where more police cruisers were arriving. "You know, Captain," Blaise said, "when I left Oak Creek to join the Bureau, it was because I saw how things worked here. Tickets for out-of-towners to pad the budget, evidence disappearing, beatings in the holding cells." He turned back to face the chief. "I've spent the last 10 years taking down cartels and human traffickers. Do you really think a small-town protection racket scares me?" "You have no proof of anything," Higgins sneered. "Just a broken taillight and a misunderstanding." At that moment, Agent Miller's laptop sitting on the conference table pinged. "Sir," Miller said, typing rapidly, "the tech team just cracked the corrupted file on Vance's body cam. It wasn't a hardware failure. The logs show a manual deletion attempt at 9:42 p.m. on the night of the arrest. But the buffer memory, it saved the previous 2 minutes." The room went deadly silent. Even Captain Higgins stopped breathing for a second. "Play it," Blaise ordered. Miller turned the laptop so everyone could see. The screen showed shaky footage from Vance's chest perspective. The date stamp was July 4th.
Video, audio.
"License and registration," Vance's voice. "Here, officer. Is something wrong?" Julian's voice, polite, calm. "Get out of the car." "Why? I didn't do anything."
I said, get out.
The camera jerked as Vance opened the car door. The footage showed Julian's hands clearly in the air. Empty hands. "I'm getting out." "I'm getting out." Then Vance's hand came into frame, holding a small, clear baggie of white powder. He didn't take it from Julian. He pulled it from his own vest pocket. "Looks like we found some coke." "Kid," Vance's voice sneered on the recording. "What? That's not mine. You just pulled that out of your pocket. Who are they going to believe, me or you?" Then the camera violently shook as Vance tackled Julian. "Stop resisting. Stop resisting!" Miller paused the video. Blaise looked at Captain Higgins. The chief's face had gone pale. The bluster completely deflated. This wasn't just brutality. This was planting evidence. This was a felony that carried a 20-year sentence. That, Higgins swallowed hard. That looks bad. But Vance acts alone. He's a rogue element. You can't put that on the department. Blaise smiled, but it was a wolf smile. That's the funny thing about rogue elements, Captain. They usually keep trophies. Blaise picked up the evidence bag containing Vance's phone. While Miller was recovering the video, our analysts in D.C. did a cloud dump of Vance's phone. Do you know who he texted right after he planted that baggie? Blaise took a step toward Higgins, invading his personal space. He texted you, Captain. The message reads, "Got another quota filler. Easy target. Clean up the paperwork for me." Blaise held up the phone screen, showing the text message thread. "And you replied with the thumbs-up emoji." Julian gasped from the corner. Captain Higgins looked at the door, calculating his odds of running. But Agent Kovich blocked the exit, hand on his holster. "Greg Higgins," Blaise said, pulling a second pair of handcuffs from his belt. "You have the right to remain silent." "But honestly, I'd start talking," Blaise whispered. "Because Vance is going to flip on you in about 10 minutes to save his own skin, and I only have one immunity deal to offer." Blaise snapped the cuff on the chief's wrist. "Twist number 1, Blaise whispered to the room. "The rot always starts at the head." The holding cell at the Oak Creek County Sheriff's Department smelled of bleach and desperation. Officer Derek Vance sat on a metal bench, his hands still cuffed behind him, staring at the concrete floor. The arrogance that had fueled him in the courtroom was gone, replaced by the hollow realization that his life was effectively over. The heavy steel door groaned open. Blaise Banks walked in alone. He carried a metal chair which he spun around and straddled, placing his arms on the backrest. He stared at Vance for a long, uncomfortable minute. "They're processing Chief Higgins right now," Blaise said quietly. "He's crying. Did you know he cries when he gets scared? It's pathetic." Vance didn't look up. "I want a lawyer." "You'll get one," Blaise nodded. "Eventually. But right now it's just us." "And I want to tell you a story, Derek." Blaise leaned forward. "I checked the property records for the block where you arrested my son. It's an interesting neighborhood. Historic, working class, mostly. Black families who have lived there for generations. My mother lives 3 streets over." Vance's eye twitched. "And then I looked at the arrest records for your unit over the last 6 months." Blaise continued. "A spike in juvenile arrests, specifically male teenagers from that exact 4-block radius. Drug possession, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, all felonies. All enough to drain a family's savings on legal fees. All enough to make them desperate." Blaise pulled a folded map from his inside pocket and smoothed it out on the table. It was a zoning map of Oak Creek. "Here is the neighborhood," Blaise pointed. "And here is the proposed site for the Sterling Heights luxury condominiums, a project spearheaded by Mayor Anthony Sterling." Vance swallowed hard. He looked at the map, then at Blaise. "You see, Derek." "Here is what I think," Blaise said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "I don't think you're just a racist cop. I think you're a hired thug. You target the sons of the homeowners who refuse to sell to the developers. You slap a felony on the kid. The parents panic. They need money for a lawyer, or they just want to get their kid out of a bad neighborhood. So they sell the house cheap. The developers move in. The mayor gets his photo op. And you? What do you get? A bonus? A cut of the sale?" Vance remained silent, but sweat was beading on his forehead. "Higgins is already cutting a deal," Blaise lied. "He hadn't even interviewed Higgins yet. He's blaming it all on you. He says you came up with the idea. He says you pressured him." "That lying son of a bitch?" Vance shouted, his head snapping up. "He's the one who gave me the list. He's the one who said, 'Make life hell for the Banks family.'" The room went still. Blaise sat back, his expression unreadable. The Banks family, specifically. Vance realized he had said too much, but the dam had broken. "Your mother, Constance Banks, she's the holdout. She owns the corner lot. The developers can't break ground without her land. She refused every offer. So Higgins said, he said if we squeezed her grandson, she'd break. She'd sell to pay for his defense." Blaise stood up slowly. The fury radiating off him was so intense the air felt charged with static. "You went after my son," Blaise said, "to force my mother to sell her home." "It wasn't my idea," Vance pleaded, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "It's Mayor Sterling and the judge. Reynolds signs the warrants. She sets the bail so high the families have to sell. I'm just a soldier, man. I just do what I'm told." Blaise walked to the door and knocked twice. Agent Miller opened it immediately. "Get a stenographer in here," Blaise ordered, "and get the U.S. Attorney on the phone." "Mr. Vance is ready to sing." Blaise walked out of the cell, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from the effort it took not to go back inside and tear Vance apart. This wasn't just police brutality. This was a conspiracy, a machine designed to chew up families and spit out real estate profits. And the man running the machine was the most powerful man in the city. Mayor Anthony Sterling was a handsome man. He had the kind of smile that won elections, and the kind of eyes that looked great on billboards. He sat in his mahogany-paneled office, sipping a scotch, watching the local news on a flat-screen TV. Breaking news. Chaos at courthouse. Local FBI agent arrests police chief and officer in stunning turn of events. Sterling muted the TV. He looked at the woman sitting across from him. Judge Martha Reynolds looked less regal without her robes. She looked small and frightened, clutching her purse with white-knuckled hands. "Anthony, they have Derek," Reynolds hissed. "And they have Greg Higgins. How long before they point the finger at us?" "Calm down, Martha," Sterling said smoothly. "Higgins is loyal, and Vance is an idiot, but he knows if he talks, he loses his pension. Besides, it's Blaise Banks. I remember him from high school. He was a quarterback. Good arm, no strategy. He's an assistant director of the FBI, Anthony. He's not a high school jock anymore." "He's a father," Sterling corrected her. "And he's emotional. He's overreaching. We spin this. We control the narrative." Sterling hit a button on his intercom. Send in the press. An hour later, Blaise was standing in the temporary command center set up in the FBI field, office 2 towns over. He was watching the monitor. Mayor Sterling stood at a podium flanked by grim-faced city council members. He looked serious, concerned, and utterly trustworthy. "Citizens of Oak Creek," Sterling began, his voice practiced and grave. "Today we witnessed a shocking abuse of power, not by our local police who risk their lives every day, but by the federal government. An agent acting on a personal vendetta because his son was arrested for narcotics possession, stormed our courthouse and took our chief of police hostage under false pretenses." Blaise's jaw dropped. "He's gaslighting the entire city. This is a federal overreach of the highest order," Sterling continued. "The drugs found on Julian Banks were real. The assault on Officer Vance was real, but Agent Blaise Banks is using his badge to cover up his son's crimes and dismantle our local law enforcement to protect his family's reputation. I have already called the Department of Justice to file a formal complaint." "Sir," Agent Kovich said, holding a phone. "It's the deputy director for you." Blaise took the phone. "Banks." "Blaise, what the hell is going on down there?" And the deputy director's voice was sharp. "I have a senator on line 2, asking why you arrested a police chief without a warrant." "I have probable cause, sir. I have body cam footage of planted evidence. I have a confession implicating the mayor in a RICO conspiracy involving real estate fraud and civil rights violations." "Do you have the mayor?" "Not yet. I need a warrant for his financial records." "You're not getting it," the director said. "Not yet. The optics are terrible, Blaise. It looks like a dad saving his kid. You're too close to this. I'm pulling you off the case." "You can't do that," Blaise said, his voice dropping. "They targeted my mother. They targeted my son." "Exactly. You have a conflict of interest. Stand down, Blaise. Return to D.C. immediately. We're sending a neutral team to investigate." The line went dead. Blaise stared at the phone. A neutral team. By the time a neutral team got up to speed, Sterling would have shredded every document, wiped every server, and probably arranged for Vance to have an accident in his cell. "Sir," Agent Miller asked tentatively, "what are the orders?" Blaise looked at his team. These were good agents, young, idealistic. He couldn't ask them to throw away their careers. "The order," Blaise said, "is to pack up. We've been recalled to D.C." Miller looked crushed. "Sir, we can't just leave. You heard Vance. They're stealing people's homes." "I know," Blaise said. He took off his badge and placed it on the desk. He then unholstered his service weapon and placed it next to the badge. "Agent Miller, take these into evidence. Log them as secured." "Sir?" "I'm officially on administrative leave," Blaise said, loosening his tie. "Which means I'm no longer a federal agent. I'm just a private citizen visiting his hometown." Blaise walked to the door. "Where are you going?" Kovich asked. "I'm going to go visit my mother," Blaise said. "And then I'm going to go to church." It wasn't a church exactly. It was a small, run-down community center on the south side of Oak Creek. But on Thursday nights, it was where the real power of the neighborhood gathered. Blaise walked in. The room fell silent. 50 people sat in folding chairs. Tired people. Angry people. People who had been bullied by Officer Vance and ignored by Mayor Sterling. At the front of the room stood an elderly woman with silver hair and a spine of steel. Constance Banks, Blaise's mother. "Blaise," she said, her voice stern but warm. "I heard you got fired." "Not fired, Mama, just unleashed." Blaise turned to the crowd. He recognized faces from his childhood. Mr. Henderson, the grocer. Mrs. Higgins, no relation to the chief. The choir director. "Mayor Sterling went on TV and said I was the villain," Blaise said to the room. "He said I was abusing my power. He thinks because he took my badge, he took my power." Blaise looked around the room, but he forgot where I came from. He forgot that before I was a Fed, I was a Southsider. He thinks this is a legal battle. It's not. It's a street fight. A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. "I need your help," Blaise said. "Sterling is smart. He covers his tracks on paper. But he's arrogant. He keeps his dirt close. I need to know where the money's going. I need to know who the bagman is. I need eyes on the mayor, on the judge, on the developers. We are going to do what the FBI can't do because of red tape. We are going to conduct a surveillance operation so tight that Sterling won't be able to sneeze without us knowing." A young man in the back stood up. He was wearing a hoodie, looking skeptical. "Why should we help you? You left. You became one of them." "I know," Blaise said humbly. "And I'm sorry. I thought I could fix things from the top down, but I was wrong. You fix things from the root up." Constance Banks stepped forward. She put a hand on her son's shoulder. "He's my boy," she said simply. "And they messed with my grandson. Now, who's ready to work?" Every hand in the room went up. "Good," Blaise grinned. "Twist number 2. The blue wall of silence is strong. But the neighborhood grapevine? It sees everything." The neutral team from the FBI arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was led by Special Agent in Charge, Assassin Robert Kincaid, a man known in the Bureau as the Auditor. He was humorless, by the book, and had a reputation for cleaning up messes by burying them. Kincaid set up shop in the police station, effectively freezing Blaise out. But Kincaid had made a fatal error. He assumed the evidence was on the computers. He didn't know that the evidence was currently sitting in Mrs. Gabler's bakery box on 4th Street. "You were right," Blaise said, sitting in the back of his mother's kitchen, looking at the stack of photos spread out on the floral tablecloth. The photos had been taken by Terrell, a 16-year-old kid who delivered Uber Eats on his bike. Nobody paid attention to a delivery kid. Terrell had snapped photos of Judge Martha Reynolds's husband, a local accountant, meeting with a man in a black sedan behind the old cannery. That's not just a man. Blaise pointed at the grainy figure in the sedan. That's Vincent the Hammer Moretti. He's a fixer for the Tri-State Construction Syndicate. If Sterling is in bed with Moretti, this isn't just fraud. It's organized crime. We tracked the money, too, Constance said, pouring Blaise a cup of coffee. Mrs. Higgins at the bank. She noticed something. What? Every time a house in our neighborhood is sold for cash, the funds don't go to the developer's main account. They go to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Oakview Holdings. Blaise pulled out his laptop, a personal one, completely off the grid. And let me guess, the signatories for Oakview are... He hacked into the public registry of the shell company, a trick he'd learned from the cybercrimes division. It took 10 minutes. When the screen loaded, Blaise smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. Judge Martha Reynolds, Chief Greg Higgins, and Mayor Anthony Sterling. They're splitting the profits 3 ways, Constance whispered. They arrest the kids, force the parents to sell cheap, flip the land to the developers at a premium, and pocket the difference. It's a perfect circle, Blaise said. Vance provides the pressure. Reynolds provides the legal cover. Sterling provides the political access. And Higgins keeps the cops in line. The phone in Blaise's pocket buzzed. It was a burner phone he had given to Agent Miller, who was technically supposed to be shunning him. Boss, Miller's voice whispered. You need to know. Kincaid is shutting it down. He's cutting a deal with the mayor, Sterling, is agreeing to resign for health reasons in exchange for immunity. They're going to bury the RICO charges to avoid a scandal. Blaise gripped the phone. When? Tonight. At the groundbreaking gala for the Sterling Heights project, Sterling is going to announce his retirement after he shovels the first dirt. He gets to walk away rich. Not if I can help it, Blaise said. Boss, you can't go there, Miller warned. Kincaid has a bolo out on you. If you step foot on the property, they'll arrest you for trespassing and obstruction. Blaise hung up. He looked at his mother. He looked at Julian, who was sitting in the living room studying for a math test despite the chaos of the last week. Mama? Blaise said, standing up. I need my suit. The blue one. You going to a party? Constance asked, her eyes twinkling. No, Blaise said. I'm going to a funeral. The Oak Creek Country Club was a fortress of wealth, isolated from the rotting infrastructure of the city it exploited. Tonight, the sprawling manicured lawns were bathed in the soft, golden glow of fairy lights strung between ancient oak trees. It was the groundbreaking gala for Sterling Heights, an event that carried a ticket, price higher than the annual income of most residents. In Blaise Banks's childhood neighborhood, Mayor Anthony Sterling stood in the VIP tent, adjusting his silk tie in a full-length mirror. He looked at his reflection and saw a winner. Tonight was the victory lap. In less than an hour, he would announce his retirement due to health reasons, a carefully orchestrated exit strategy that would allow him to move to a non-extradition country with millions of dollars in offshore accounts. You look nervous, Martha, Sterling said, not turning around. Judge Martha Reynolds sat on a velvet chaise lounge, clutching a glass of champagne with both hands. Her knuckles were white. I don't like it, Anthony. That FBI agent Kincaid, he's been staring at me all night. And the rumors about Vance talking, if Vance talks, we're dead. Sterling laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. Vance is a grunt. He's scared. I sent a lawyer to see him an hour ago with a simple message. Keep your mouth shut, and your family gets taken care of. Talk, and you hang alone. Vance isn't smart, but he's loyal to self-preservation. Relax, Martha. By midnight, we'll be celebrating the future. Outside, the atmosphere was electric with false cheer. Waiters in white tuxedos navigated through crowds of donors, developers, and local celebrities. At the edge of the crowd stood SAC Robert Kincaid. He wore an earpiece and a scowl. He knew the mayor was dirty. He could smell it, but without hard evidence, His hands were tied by the DOJ. The order was to let the resignation happen and minimize the political fallout. All units hold positions, Kincaid muttered into his lapel microphone. Let the mayor finish his speech. We move in for a quiet interview afterwards. No scenes. But Kincaid didn't know that the scene was already walking through the service entrance of the kitchen. Blaise Banks moved with the silent lethality of a predator. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was dressed in a sharp midnight blue suit that fit his broad frame perfectly. He looked like a wealthy donor, except for the intensity in his eyes. Behind him, Agent Miller, who had officially gone rogue, was carrying a laptop case. Flanking them were Julian and 3 tech-savvy teenagers from the neighborhood, dressed as catering staff. We have 3 minutes until he takes the stage, Blaise whispered, checking his watch. Miller, can you bypass the localized closed-circuit feed? Miller smirked, plugging a USB drive into the main AV control board located behind the stage. Boss, this system is running on Windows 98. I could bypass this with a toaster. We're in. Good, Blaise said. He looked at his son. Julian, you stay here. When the chaos starts, I don't want you in the crossfire. No, Julian said firmly. His lip was still swollen, a reminder of the slap that started it all. He humiliated me in front of a judge. Dad, I want to see him fall. Blaise looked at the boy, no, the young man, and nodded. Stay close. A fanfare of trumpets blasted through the massive speakers, silencing the chatter of the crowd. A spotlight swept across the lawn and landed on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies announced, the visionary of Oak Creek, Mayor Anthony Sterling. Applause rippled through the night air, polite and rhythmic. Sterling bounded onto the stage, flashing his $1,000,000 smile. He gripped the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. Thank you. Thank you all, Sterling boomed. Tonight is about legacy. Tonight we break ground not just on luxury condominiums, but on a new standard of living. For too long, the South Side has been a blight on our beautiful city. Tonight we begin the process of purification. In the back, Blaise clenched his fists. Purification. It was a sanitized word for displacement. But Sterling's voice dropped to a somber, practiced tone. Leading the city has taken a toll. It is with a heavy heart that I announce tonight will be my final public appearance. My doctors have advised me. Scream! A high-pitched feedback loop tore through the speakers, causing the guests to cover their ears. The massive LED screen behind Sterling, which was displaying a rendering of the glass towers, flickered violently. Technical difficulties, Sterling joked, sweating slightly. Even the technology is sad to see me go. The crowd chuckled nervously, but the screen didn't go back to the rendering. The image shifted. It distorted, pixels bleeding together, until a new video snapped into crisp, high-definition focus. It wasn't a building. It was the interior of a police interrogation room. The crowd went deadly silent. On the screen, Officer Vance was sitting at a metal table. But he wasn't the arrogant bully the town knew. He was weeping, his face buried in his hands. Sterling froze. He looked back at the screen, his eyes widening in horror. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Sterling waved frantically at the sound booth. Cut it! Cut the feed! It's a hack! But the video cut to a new clip. This one wasn't video. It was audio accompanied by a waveform visual. Voice 1, Sterling. I don't care about the families. Greg, just get the land, squeezed the grandmother. If she breaks, the neighborhood breaks. Voice 2, Chief Higgins. Vance is on it. We'll plant something on the grandson tonight. She'll sell by Monday. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Sterling stood alone on the stage, stripped of his armor. He looked at the crowd, the donors, the press, the city council. They weren't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him like he was a disease. Deepfake. Sterling screamed, his voice cracking. This is AI. This is a political hit job. None of this is real. It's real, Anthony. The voice didn't come from the speakers. It came from the darkness at the edge of the stage. Blaise Banks stepped into the spotlight. The moment he appeared, The air in the country club seemed to drop 10 degrees. He walked up the stairs of the stage, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. Sterling stumbled back, knocking over the podium. "Security! Arrest him! He's a trespasser! He's unhinged!" Blaise stopped 5 feet from the mayor. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He radiated a calm, terrifying authority. "I'm not unhinged, Mr. Mayor," Blaise said, his voice projecting without a microphone. "I'm a father, and you made a mistake. You thought because my mother lived in the blight of the city, she didn't matter. You thought because my son was young and black, he was disposable." Blaise reached into his jacket pocket. Sterling flinched, expecting a gun. Blaise pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a federal warrant," Blaise said, holding it up for the cameras that were now zooming in, broadcasting live to the entire state. "Signed 10 minutes ago by a federal judge who saw the evidence you just tried to hide. It charges you with racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, and obstruction of justice." Sterling looked for an exit. He looked at the VIP tent. Judge Reynolds was trying to crawl under a table, but the guests were backing away from her, forming a circle of judgment. "You can't do this," Sterling hissed, sweat dripping down his nose. "I am the mayor. I have friends in Washington." "You have no friends," Blaise said, cold as ice. "Not anymore." Blaise turned to the side of the stage. "Agent Kincaid, I believe this is your jurisdiction now." Zach Kincaid stepped out of the shadows. He looked at Blaise with a newfound respect, then turned his gaze to the mayor. Kincaid had been by the book his whole life, but he knew when the book had been burned. "Anthony Sterling," Kincaid announced, snapping a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No!" Sterling shouted. Panic took over. He shoved Kincaid and tried to leap off the front of the stage. It was a pathetic attempt. Before his feet could hit the grass, Agent Miller tackled him mid-air. They crashed into the manicured lawn in a tangle of limbs. Sterling screamed as his face was pressed into the dirt. The very dirt he had tried to steal. "Get off me! Do you know who I am?" Sterling wailed. "Yeah," Miller grunted, yanking Sterling's arms back and ratcheting the cuffs tight. "You're a prisoner, 0943. Pandemonium broke out. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning. Guests were recording on their phones. In the chaos, Blaise walked down the stage steps and found Julian. The boy was standing tall, watching the man who had tried to ruin his life being dragged away like a common criminal. "Did you see his face?" Julian asked, a mixture of shock and satisfaction in his voice. "I saw it," Blaise said, putting an arm around his son. "That's the face of a man who just realized that money can't buy gravity. What goes up must come down." The trial of the Oak Creek 4 became the most watched legal event in the state's history. Without the protection of the mayor, the blue wall of silence crumbled instantly. Chief Higgins testified against Sterling to save himself from a life sentence. Officer Vance testified against the chief to reduce his own time. They turned on each other like starving wolves, revealing decades of corruption, planted evidence, and stolen deeds. 3 months later, the sentencing hearing was held. The courtroom was packed, but this time the atmosphere was different. The fear was gone. Judge Martha Reynolds was up first. The former judge wept openly as she was stripped of her pension and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for judicial misconduct and fraud. Chief Greg Higgins, the man who had facilitated the quota system, received 15 years. Officer Derek Vance, the enforcer, stood before the bench. He looked at the gallery and saw Julian Banks. For the first time, Vance didn't look with hate. He looked with regret. He received 12 years with a recommendation for protective custody because, as everyone knew, cops don't fare well in the general population. Finally, it was Anthony Sterling's turn. The former mayor stood defiant to the end, refusing to admit guilt, claiming he was a victim of a deep state conspiracy. The federal judge, a stern man named Judge Alastair Thorne, looked over his glasses at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Thorne said, his voice echoing in the silent room, "you took an oath to serve the public. Instead, you feasted on them. You targeted the vulnerable to line your pockets. You are not a victim. You are a predator. And society has a cage for predators." The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. "I sentence you to 30 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, without the possibility of parole. Get him out of my sight." As the bailiffs hauled a screaming Sterling away, the courtroom erupted in applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was the roar of a community reclaiming its dignity. Outside on the courthouse steps, the autumn air was crisp. Blaise and Julian walked out together, squinting in the sun. "So," Julian said, adjusting his backpack. He was starting his first semester of college the next day. "Is it really over?" Blaise looked at the street. He saw Mrs. Gabler waving from her bakery. He saw kids playing on the sidewalk without fear of a patrol car curbing them for no reason. "The case is over," Blaise said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his gold FBI badge. He had polished it that morning. "But the work?" "The work is never over. Are you going back to D.C.?" Julian asked. "No," Blaise smiled, clipping the badge onto his belt. "I accepted the promotion. Special agent in charge of the new anti-corruption field office. Based right here in Oak Creek." Julian laughed. "Bad news for the bad guys." "Terrible news," Blaise agreed. "Come on, Grandma made peach cobbler. We don't want to be late for that." They walked down the steps, father and son, leaving the shadow of the courthouse behind them, stepping into the light of a new day. Officer Vance thought his badge was a shield. Mayor Sterling thought his money was a fortress. But they both forgot the oldest rule of the streets. You never corner a man who has nothing to lose, especially when that man is a father protecting his son. In a single night, the empire of lies they built came crashing down, proving that while justice might be blind, karma sees everything. What an incredible journey! If you felt the satisfaction of seeing that gavel drop on the mayor, please smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications.